first army in the Arab world ever to force the Israelis to retreat.
They have evolved from a very small guerrilla organization to a very professional army.
Hezbollah is doing all the things for the people.
We are not a terrorist movement.
Hezbollah wants us dead.
We will attack and fight for our lives.
Good evening, I'm Anderson Cooper in Beirut. Tonight, inside Hezbollah, the party of God. Freedom fighters to some in the Muslim world, terrorists to the U.S. and Israel. 25 years ago, few had ever heard of Hezbollah. Now it's one of the most powerful groups in the region. Its war against Israel has already claimed hundreds of lives. Tonight, over the next hour, we'll take you inside Hezbollah, a revealing look at its tactics, its leaders, and its impact, not only on Israel, but on the U.S. and the entire Middle East. A relentless barrage of missiles. Casualties on both sides. The escalating battle between Israel and Hezbollah is decades old. Hezbollah was founded in 1982 in response to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. It seeks the destruction of Israel, and with an AK-47 emblazoned on its trademark yellow flag, attacks in the name of Islam. The word Hezbollah means party of God. Most Americans first became aware of Hezbollah on October 23, 1983. A truck packed with explosives detonated outside the Marine barracks in Beirut.
It was the largest non-nuclear explosion anywhere on Earth since World War II. It was the largest loss of American military life in a single incident since Iwo Jima.
241 American servicemen were killed. The force of the explosion reduced the building to rubble. Many of the victims, Marines, sent to Beirut to keep peace between Israel and various factions in Lebanon. The attack was Hezbollah's calling card of terror, delivered to America by a suicide bomber. Over the years, there would be many more. Kidnappings. In 1985, journalist Terry Anderson was seized. In 1987, they took church envoy Terry Waite.
They suspected, wrongly, that I was involved in what became known as the Iran-Contra affair, and I was able to convince them that I was a humanitarian negotiator, and I came out with my life.
Both men were eventually released. There have been other suicide attacks, most notably in June of 1996, when 19 U.S. airmen were killed in an explosion that ripped through the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. By U.S. and Israeli estimates, Hezbollah is responsible for more than 200 terror attacks that have killed more than 800 people since 1980. That's why the U.S. calls Hezbollah a terror group. But in Lebanon, to many, it is much more than just that.
They're quite a deeply community-oriented organization that is primarily a social organization first, a militant organization second.
Inside Lebanon, Hezbollah has a television network with millions of viewers. It's also a political party that's gaining strength in Lebanon's parliament. Hezbollah has its own hospitals, its own schools and charities. It's a lifeline for Shias living in Beirut's impoverished suburbs and throughout southern Lebanon.
They provide birth to death insurance for their members and for their community. They remind me of a kind of a ward organization, a precinct organization in Chicago. They know where everyone lives, they know what the problems are, they have social service workers, and they know their people very well.
Maybe true, but to Israel and America, Hezbollah is first and foremost a threat.
It's this provocation of Hezbollah that has created this crisis, and that's the root cause of the problem.
Israelis like Ron Kierman live on the northern border in constant fear.
Yes, definitely people are afraid, and I think that fear is one of the thing that keeps us alive.
Kierman has experienced terror firsthand. His daughter, the victim of a suicide bomber. He believes Israel's military might is more than justified against Hezbollah.
I have to emphasize that Hizbullah is an extension of the Iranians, and the Iranian president said not once and not twice that he does not want us here, period. He wants to eliminate me.
Experts say Hezbollah now has cells around the world, including inside the United States. But most of its support, cash, rockets, training, comes from its neighbors to the east, Syria and Iran.
Iran remains the kind of sponsor of Hezbollah. It is the primary source of arms. It is reported to provide about $100 million a year in arms, goods, and cash. Syria's role is one of facilitator. It is the logistical link between Tehran and Beirut.
That financial backing has helped Hezbollah evolve into a formidable force in the region, one capable of waging war. So what does Hezbollah want now?
They want to play an important role. They want the state to invest in the infrastructure in the Shia areas, and they want their place under the sun in Lebanon, but definitely they don't want to disarm.
Destroying Hezbollah is Israel's top priority.
We shall hunt down every single terrorist who is threatening Israel.
CNN's military analyst, General David Grange, was involved in counterterrorism activities in the region in the early 1980s.
I think if there's going to be a global war on terrorism, it has to be disarmed. The question is, who's going to do it? Who's going to have the guts to do it? I think we should be thankful, whether you like Israel or not, that Israel's taking them on.
And taking them on with a vengeance.
We cannot live under this umbrella of terror missiles. And we will attack and fight for our lives.
Born of war, Hezbollah now is once again at war with Israel. Innocent victims suffering on both sides of the conflict. Israel says they hope to destroy the military capabilities of Hezbollah. But can they? And what happens to Hezbollah if they do? I talked about that earlier with CNN's chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour, who was with the Israeli military along the border.
Israel wants to weaken it, wants to destroy its military ability, wants to make sure that it never again sits on the border and is able at will to fire into parts of northern Israel.
But if it is broken militarily, if they don't have the capabilities of launching missiles, of launching military operations on their own, what happens to Hezbollah politically within Lebanon?
Well, they're hoping that the Lebanese government can eventually, and it'll take time, assert itself as the national and sovereign state and army, and that Hezbollah, which already had moved very, very fast and rapidly from just being a military organization to politics.
No place is safe in Haifa these days. A northern city well within reach of Hezbollah's rockets, Haifa is the newest target of terror. And no one is more familiar with the reality of that terror than Neshed Gal.
It's very hard, very difficult to see a direct hit on a house, on somebody's life.
A bomb expert with the Haifa police, Gal looks for clues in the rocket remnants in order to better understand what Hezbollah has in its arsenal. Coincidentally, the first rocket to hit Haifa landed in Gal's neighborhood.
It was surprising and shocking, and nobody expected it.